Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading property experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, and Ben Kingsley, Chair of Property Investment Professionals of Australia and the 2014 and 2015 Property Investment Advisor of the Year.
All right, folks, you're on the Property Couch where each week Ben and I bring you the insider's guide to property investing. Hey, mate, how good was it before we came on? I always say good day, mate, and you always say, hey, mate, how you going? So I thought I'd skip that.
Good.
Cool that?
Yeah.
How good was it? You know, we're both born in the 70s. Before, for the listeners' benefit here, we got Ivis, who was born in the 2000s. No, she was born in the 90s.
Talking about our kids.
And just the way it was
parenting.
for us and parenting. So just we won't go into it, but I was a bit frustrated with
just
being stuck in the 70s time warp.
And then I teed off on how these kids have got a sense of entitlement. They get everything they want. Yeah, no,
I feel good now.
Jeez, we're old men, aren't we?
Now,
we are old men.
Now I know what it's like to sit on Oprah's couch. Once you get it off your chest, it just feels great.
So, yes. So hopefully our wives don't listen to this, but yes. No,
well, we can guarantee they don't listen to this, can't we?
Yeah, that's true.
But a shout out to all those 70s and earlier parents on the podcast because...
people who came to kids late in life, like us too, who have got young children who are in our 40s.
We can relate to it.
Unbelievable.
Hey, I want to start today, Ben, with a big
Before you do, footy season.
Yeah, no,
footy
we're
season.
getting to that.
Okay, sorry. I thought you were into it.
We're getting to that.
Because we're highly organised.
Highly rehearsed. No, I want to thank the listeners. Time to share the love.
Love it.
Hashtag Chase for Tim.
Yep.
Smoked it.
Yes, we did. We're over 300 now.
301 as of last night, which again is the narcissistic sounding part of the podcast. But what it does is it keeps us relevant, and because we get some really terrific feedback from people to say it's helped them, it's changed their path.
We read them.
We do read them.
I do. I mean, maybe on a late Sunday night if I'm not getting to sleep and feeling about all the extra work I've got coming up this week, just to calm myself down, I just say, it's all worth it. It's all worth it. I'm just going to read a couple of reviews. It's all worth it.
That's the entrepreneur's curse, isn't it? Sunday night. You got
the anxieties.
The privilege of working 80 hours a week so you don't have to work for someone else for 40.
Yes.
So, very good Sunday night. But so the feedback people are getting, some husbands and wife are sitting down and listening to it together. So we appreciate that, folks. Yeah. But ever since we started, we're episode 100, and I also have it written down somewhere, 108. So for 108 weeks, Ben, I reckon there's only been 2 weeks that we haven't featured in the top 10 in the business category. So we've been consistently saying in the top 10. And that's because our listeners are prepared to do something that not everyone's prepared to do. And that's give us a 5-star rating and leave some feedback, which keeps us... Because iTunes algorithm is just a mystery. Nobody knows how it works, but we do know to stay relevant. It's about people downloading us on a regular basis and those reviews. So
our job is to keep putting good content that you guys can then use and make smart decisions with your money rather than the dumb decisions. So we'll keep, striving for that. We've actually done some planning, haven't we? Got some great talent coming up.
Come on, we don't plan.
We're not us. We're just getting other people to come on to tell us their story.
No, we've got a cool series coming up, haven't we?
Oh, yes, we do.
We've got the Elite Agent series coming up.
Yeah.
So the listeners are thinking, well, why do we want to know from the elite real estate agents? Melbourne has some of the best real estate agents in the world, Ben, not just Australia, but in the world.
Yep.
And so we're getting 3 of the top ones in this state to come on from their unique perspective on how they see buyers in the marketplace and how they can use their insights to make people have better skills when they're looking to buy the next property. I can't wait.
I can't wait either. I mean, there's going to be so much great content that you can put in. And we were saying, even though we're buy hold and we love the idea of holding and building passive income, our family members or someone we will know who's going to sell a property too. So I can't wait to ask great questions around, how do you pick the right agent to help you sell your property and all those type of things. So it's going to be fun,
mate. And there's some really outgoing people coming on. So there's going to be some terrific insights. You know, these guys have been doing it for over. Glenn's over 30, Brad's over 30, and Tim.
Well, at least close. Over 20.
So
at least.
Loads and so there's close to 70 years of experience coming on exclusively for our podcast listeners. So hang in there, folks. There's some really great stuff coming up. Is there something happening tonight?
Yeah, first game of the footy season. I can't wait. I mean, it's a little bit of a soft launch because it's only Richmond and Carlton. So to all those Richmond and Carlton supporters, I mean, this is your time in the sun because you'll be holding up the rest of the ladder for the rest of the year. And then we go into the real game on Friday night, don't we? 24 hours later, the reigning premiers taking on the number one contenders for the premiership this year in the Pies.
So I don't know.
And we start off the week with a really good one. We try to build great men, and then they come into the club and lie to us.
Oh yeah. But it's we're so desensitized to it now. It's just another Collingwood thing. But how long's that been? How many episodes? So 108, and we probably haven't had footy banter for 20 episodes.
Been over 100 days.
Yeah.
Pretty much. I did mention it a couple of weeks ago.
So this is the self-indulgent part.
It is. This is where we get.
Because do you know how many people write into us and say we love the show in brackets except the footy banter?
Because that I reckon around round 8, when both Fremantle and Collingwood are really down the bottom part of the ladder, we won't talk about footy anymore for the rest of the year.
Fremantle down the bottom. I'm not sure about that either.
Not sure about that. Quietly confident.
I am.
I don't know why, because I've seen their team and I don't rate them. Okay. But anyway, that's Freo. But I have tipped them this week as in an upset against the Cats.
So what?
Yeah, I've tipped them.
Yeah. Easy.
So, yeah.
Easy.
I didn't tip the Pies, just for the record.
Don't tell Ivers, because she won the tipping last year. So it's...
third.
Oh, that's right. She choked in the last week. All right.
Okay, let's get into it.
What are we chatting about today?
Look, everything in Australian politics at the moment is around housing affordability. So I wanted to talk to that because I think our listeners were sort of saying, let's talk about something timely. So where does this conversation start and where does this conversation end? I mean, what we are seeing, we saw last week NAB come out and raise interest rates. We've seen Westpac follow. So we are starting to see this trend where it is Pick on Property Investor Month at the moment. And I think that's going to continue. So it's probably, we property investors have been obviously very successful. We've been advocating how good property investing is for mum and dad investors all this journey. And now it's probably too popular. So part of me is absolutely saying, and I've been banging on about this probably now for 6 months, that the market's overdone in some pockets and there will be people who will lose money in property. So hopefully that's not one of our listeners because they're doing asset selection right and they're understanding owner-occupier appeal and investment grade property. But there are people who are going to have a negative position or a red ink on their balance sheet buying property now, especially with the amount of people who are getting into the market in New South Wales and in some pockets in Melbourne as well. So let's make no mistake, property is not a guaranteed return. So we want to recognise that and make sure that all the listeners understand that when we're giving this advice, there are going to be times where the property market is going to correct, which could be better buying opportunity times or be a boardless investor and get into those other markets. So there's that one bit, Bryce. But the other stuff I wanted to then get into is the political football. It's a hot potato right now because it's been woven in and we're seeing politicians blame property investors for everything. So here's the deal. I've got a meeting with John Alexander, the Liberal Minister, and also I'm trying to also tee up a meeting with the Deputy Treasurer of Australia, the Federal Treasurer as well. And in fact, yesterday I asked my Corporate Affairs Manager, because I'm wearing my PIPA Chairman hat at the moment, I've asked for a meeting with the Treasurer of Australia as well. Because it's a serious issue and there's something that I'm going to announce on this podcast exclusively for the very first time in hopefully about a month or two's time, which is really about helping property investors in the best way that I think we can help property investors nationally. So watch this space on that. But because we're coming up to the budget, there's, what other conversations have we seen there? Deposits, using super for your deposits. We've seen the Victorian government down here do incentives for first home buyers to get them into the market in terms of waiving stamp duties and a few other things. So there is some real pressure. And I want to come back to the interest rate story. So with the interest rate story, it's too politically sensitive at the moment because you've got this Labor Party who are trying to get a, what's it called? Mental blank.
They want a mental blank.
They want a mental blank.
Whilst you're gathering your thoughts, Ives,
Thank you.
Do you know how I'm on the cover of our book with Ben? When Donald Trump was elected president, Robert Kiyosaki came out and said that he's now on the front page with the president of the United States. So what I'm hearing Ben say here is at some point in the future, I'll be able to say that I'm on the cover of a book with the Prime Minister of Australia. Is that what you're hearing? Yeah, I'm hearing the same. So mate, how are you going with your blank over there?
Royal Commission.
There we go.
Royal Commission into the banking sector. God, I don't know why.
That's all right.
I've got a bit of a problem. I've got low blood pressure at the moment.
And you went to sleep at 10:30 last night instead of 1, so you had way too much sleep.
Normally I only have about 5 to 6 hours sleep a night, but I had good sleep and that's the problem. So I'm going to go back to Anyway, so Royal Commission into banking, right? Yeah. Now they haven't even set the terms of agenda, but it just resonates to their voting base, right? So it's a stunt. We all know it's a stunt. I mean, they want to go back to 2009, 2010. We are starting to see, but because the CEOs of those banks are now getting hauled in front of the standing Senate committee inquiry, there's real pressure. And we saw recently that with interest rate cuts, the banks didn't pass them on to owner-occupier buyers. So there's this problem now, this perceived image problem that the banks have got, that they can't lower interest rates for owner-occupiers because of the political pressure out there. So what I'm trying to say is, so what's the easy one to pick on?
Yeah.
Investors.
Yeah.
So the investors are getting picked on at the moment in terms of, because it's less politically sensitive as the banks try and manoeuvre their way through the risk of a Royal Commission. So I think from that point of view, and this is what's going on in the corridors of power in trying to understand that. So we've got that. So we've also seen the cost of funding. Internationally, we saw interest rates go up in the US, and the cost of funding globally has increased. Bond yields have gone up. So that's also putting pressures on the banks, and they're using that as a bit of an example as to why they're raising interest rates out of out of the cash rate cycle. So it's important to understand all these things are putting bubbles. And then I just read the last couple of weeks in the last couple of days in the Fin Review, a couple of stories around how there is a working committee which consists of effectively APRA, ASIC, and the Reserve Bank around further macro-prudential manipulation of the markets to try and slow down the amount of property investors coming into the market. Now, part of me says, okay, I get where you're trying to go with this, but what we've got to be, the unforeseen consequences could be big if we get it wrong in terms of slowing the broader economy down. I mean, we had a negative GDP number in September, and we bounced back in December. But if we didn't have the foreign investment into property and a thriving construction market at the moment, we'd be in recession. So we've just got to be careful in terms of what we want. And this comes back to the bigger story here, which is, at the moment, you would normally get around 25,000. In a standard market, you get about 25,000 first home buyers. Now that's sort of down to around 10 to 12, 13,000 first home buyers. But it's there's basically 9.7 million dwellings. So we're trying to set policy potentially to look after effectively a very small segment of the market. Call it, even if it's 10%. Now, what about all those people who are going to buy property for the longer term, and the property prices, I don't think they should be growing as quick as what they are. I think that's absolutely unsustainable. But I wouldn't want to go and buy a $500,000 property or $750,000 property today with a 25-year mortgage. That means that property, once I've paid all the interest, if I haven't paid it off earlier, that property owes me $1.5 million or thereabouts. Now, I need the value of that property to keep rising. Otherwise, it's a stupid investment with your money.
Yeah.
So we've got to be very careful around, if we turn off the value of investing in property, then that's the biggest problem we're going to have, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit like the the unemployment rate when people go, it's approaching 6, approaching 7. The flip side is it's 93% are employed. So
Yes.
It's the same sort of argument, isn't it? When you've got the 10% of the first home buyers, we want to make it affordable for them, but at the expense of the other 90. And it just depends on your perspective, doesn't it? Because I'm all for looking after minorities, and I'm all for the Great Australian Dream. But we've talked about it on previous podcasts. I think the challenge too is that and we'll probably touch on it later, but the fact that you're trying to play with levers that are affecting different, like Australia is one economy, and the interest rate affects, Darwin as it affects Port Noarlunga, as it affects Battery Point, as it affects South Perth. That one decision affects so many markets. But let's be honest, Perth and Darwin could do with a bit of a zhuzh, and Melbourne and Sydney could do with a little bit of a handbrake, and parts of Brisbane could do with a little bit of a hurry. So that's ultimately the biggest challenge. But you're right, because those. It's called the Herald Sun effect. I used to work in the Queensland government during the GFC, and they called it the Courier Mail effect. Every decision they made was about how does it appear on the front page of the paper, and that's what you're talking about.
Correct. The millennials do. They have this. They have social media covered, and all of the politicians are looking at social media because they're all whinging about housing affordability. So they think it's a massive issue. And don't get me wrong, I want everyone in Australia to have the opportunity to buy property. But as Jan, highly pointed out when she came on, she had a letter from her auntie back in the 50s that said buying property in Melbourne was really, in that 1950s, it's very hard, it's very expensive to buy property in Melbourne. And she's talking about areas like Middle Park and Albert Park and South Melbourne, and it was tough back then. So that's not changing. And, to have the Labor Party and the Greens effectively saying that, the real solution is negative gearing doesn't sit well with me in terms of the unforeseen consequences of what could happen around that.
Yeah, and watch this space. In 4 weeks, you're going to announce a bit around that too. So I think that's exciting.
It is.
On that point is the point there. All right, well, let's talk about the property couch and how we think we can solve
what are our views?
Solve the housing affordability.
Politicians and advisors and policymakers, both at federal and state level, these are just some of the many ideas we would have. But the number one for me is around communicating the risks of investing in property. So it's about education. So, you've heard me talk about on the podcast before, in the last big boom in New South Wales, 2/3 of the values, the median value in 2/3 of the suburbs in Sydney went backwards. So after the correction, so that it's always going to overshoot itself. So we need the marketplace to understand that there are risks in the short term around investing in property. And I think if you could get some communication out there from, and I did see one of the deputy governors of the RBA presented to, I think it was Goldman Sachs or one of those big meetings, and I think we might even put a link to it, Ivis, the speech from Michelle, and I can't think of her surname now, one of the senior people in the Reserve Bank, has basically said we are concerned about the level of activity in the property market. There is too much demand, not enough supply, and so the ones they want to pick on is a property investor. But I'm saying now, tell them all the people who are losing money. Go and have a look at the loss versus gain report from CoreLogic RP data around Australia, because property prices have come back as much as 30% in some markets in Perth, and in Darwin they're off potentially 20%, and yields are off 25% in some of those markets. There is a perfect example that all markets, it's not always up. So
there's more than Sydney. There's more. Yeah. The Australian market's made up of more than just Sydney, which is often. It's a shout out to any journalist or any influential blogger who wants to have a chat. You'd be more than happy to get that message out there, because I agree. There's a general level of complacency, and I've said it on a number of times at talks that property investing is a game of finance, not a game of bricks and mortar. Because the game of bricks and mortar is that owner-occupied space where it's an essential need and it's got practical considerations. Where my kids going to school, how am I going to get to work, all that sort of stuff. But I've spoken to, we're at the coalface, Ben. I see lots of clients who come in here, and I don't have a problem outsourcing the execution, but when they outsource the understanding, that's the challenge. And I know from experience, when I reverse engineer, they're the challenging clients, because they want to hold you accountable when it goes wrong, but they don't necessarily celebrate when it goes right. So just because you have equity in your home, and just because you live in a home, doesn't mean that you're an expert to know how to buy it. So I think that there are more investors in the marketplace previously. It's
should be in certain markets.
It's just a fact. But if they're, like you say, if they're educated as to the downside as well as the upside, that's certainly going to help and take away a bit of the FOMO.
Well, and I think that's a great thing that I was just trying to mention. FOMO is a sentiment mindset at that time. So right now I've got this fear of missing out. So I'm going to pay whatever I can to get into the market, because I think it's indefinitely going to go up. And that's the worst mindset you could have as an investor, to think that this is, the bricks and mortar bank account, as you call it, is going to keep growing indefinitely. It is not going to keep growing indefinitely. There are going to be times where it will reverse or remain flat for an extended period of time. So if we could change that sentiment in the marketplace of potentially Sydney and Melbourne to slow down that confidence, and work on that through a series of true articles that document who's winning, who's losing, because we absolutely know that there's plenty of losers in the apartment market at the moment that have paid a certain price, and now the value of their property on paper is less than what they paid for it. So those are the types of stories that if we get out through the media and through the social channels, that people will start to say, okay, well maybe I will wait. And we just take that heightened level of demand that's in the market at the moment.
Yeah, very good point. So there you go, folks. Education is the number one
What do we got
way
next
to improve housing affordability. Supply, Ben. Melbourne just recently released a plan for another 17 suburbs further out. That's a really good start, And it's part of your fool's gold mindset too, where if the government can release this new supply, which is why we don't propose being out in those areas as an investment, but as an opportunity for people to be able to buy an affordable first house, it's a great solution. If you can drop another 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 lots per month in some of these areas, that's certainly going to improve with that. But I think part of that reverts back to point number one, because we've got to have the people realising the story that Jan Summers told, the story that you and I tell, the story that people who have been there and done that, their first house was not the Duxton. It was not the Taj Mahal.
No.
And so we've got to, it leads on to the chat we had off air about the entitlement stuff. We've got to educate not just about that there's risk in property, but the property ladder looks like this.
Yes.
You make a sacrifice on the first rung
Yes.
so that the third and the fourth rung looks better for you. And for me, supply is an obvious solution.
So I want to talk to the supply, because we've also seen a couple of economists and these types of people. When I say these types of people, I'm talking about these educators and professors who sit in their university rooms and look at numbers and try and determine outcomes of that. So. And I've seen in the paper recently that they're talking about these people as property experts. They are not property experts. Stephen Keane is not a property expert. He sits there and he's an economist and looks at numbers. So it annoys me when these economists are asked about their opinion on the property market when they absolutely don't live and breathe the property market, not only in the broader numbers, in the macro, but in the micro, and seeing what's happening in the field. They're just getting a set of data, and they're looking at that data, and they're looking at things like house affordability to income ratios in a macro sense, and they don't understand it. I mean, we see household by household income, and we see $250,000 in savings and household income of $350,000. Those people can comfortably afford an investment property.
Yep.
Okay, but we can also see mum and dads whose income might be $120,000, but they live very, very diligently and frugally, and so they can also potentially get a higher yielding property and go into a different market. But when I see some of these commentators and these so-called experts come out and say it's not a supply story, like I saw in the Sydney Morning Herald recently, where there was a chart showing the amount of supply that's hit the Sydney market, sort of arguing, wait a minute, supply's ratcheted up, significantly over the last 2 years, and property prices are still going up. So it's not about supply. Wake up. It absolutely means that what you didn't put on that same graph was the level of demand that's also increased significantly as well. So they're sort of sitting there, these tertiary educated boffins, and basically are sitting there going, oh, look, so it's not a supply story because supply's increased significantly, and property prices are going up. Well, mate, put the demand curve in there as well and watch that demand curve. So
You're going to call it? You're going to call it?
I'm calling bull dust, right? Because once you put that, yes, so supply has increased. You're absolutely right. We've all seen it in terms of a medium and high density accommodation. It's increased, and it's also increased in the outer suburbs as well in terms of release of more land. But so is the demand, and that absolutely means no wonder the values are still going high. So if you can curb a bit of that demand and that supply keeps coming up, well, That's what happened in Perth. That's what that's happened in Darwin. You saw that, there was a lot of supply coming on. People didn't see how suddenly the market would turn in terms of the mining boom. And all of a sudden, you've basically, the tide's gone out and we've seen who's been swimming naked. And that's what we're talking about in Sydney and Melbourne. That's why it's important to get into the investment grade locations. So, for all those boffins who sit there and build these models for the government and the Labor Party and so forth, I would love to sit down with those people and explain to them the truth.
Mate, they're welcome on the couch.
They are welcome.
We've got a spare seat on the couch for a reason.
Yeah. Anyone who wants to come on and argue their point and or debate us, I would love a debate on this topic.
Oh, I'd love to facilitate that, I've got to tell you.
Oh, well, bring it on.
I'd have to hold you back.
Bring it on. Yep. So it's always a matter of supply and demand. And so that's why supply is a big one.
5 ways we're going to talk about today how to improve housing affordability. Number 1, education. Number 2, supply. Number 3, I reckon you won't be passionate about this one, mate. I don't reckon, but I reckon, and I'll try and talk you around, introducing some regulation.
Oh, yes.
So as the chair of the Property Investment Professionals of Australia,
Yep.
this is your flag.
Yeah, it's the flag of all of the elite professionals in our industry. If you were to bring in regulation, then all of a sudden you would take out all of these low-end, low-educated spruikers who are in for a quick buck. You take the speculators out of the market because if you had a fiduciary duty to explain to the customer why you're investing in what you're investing in, and you could back it up with substance, with good data, historical performance, or justification as to why you're taking the client into that area, showing the demand and supply ratios, all of those types of things is really important. So I'm absolutely calling on the government, if you want to absolutely take the demand from investors out, regulate us. Bring on regulation, framework it inside the Corporations Act, and make it. Now, obviously, there's going to be a run-up. We're going to need probably 18 months to 2 years to bring that in. And just as a little plug for Pippa, if you're interested in becoming, a property investment advisor, or what we call a qualified property investment advisor, get some education and some qualification in this industry of property investing, then check out the Pippa website and register to do the course. It's remote learning. It's great. It's going to give you a good baseline level of knowledge and understanding of property and investing, and caretaking in terms of appropriate advice for the client that you're looking after. And it is a growing industry. It will continue to grow. So a little plug for those people who are thinking about a change of career, come and get a QPIA from us. And we would love to look after you.
All of our team are QPIAs or very close to being that, Ben. There's a couple of challenges with that, Ben, and I've thought about this because if you're talking about a financial instrument, it's not as if someone is earning a living like a real estate agent who earns a living from residential real estate. So that's the challenge when I think about this, because you've got powerful bodies, you've got the Real Estate Institute in each state plus the Real Estate Institute of Australia, who would be a very strong voice to say, well, our guys are earning a living every day talking to owner-occupiers and investors, and they've got to talk to them about yield. So there's two parts to this, the established and the new. So just on that point, the real estate agent, it's very difficult for them to not talk about rent. It's very difficult for them not to talk about investment. And even though, some of the real estate agents, with full respect to them, they don't make that their speciality, so therefore some of their information is a little bit sort of flavoured to their end outcome.
Yep.
That to me seems to be the ultimate roadblock, and I'm sure there's an answer, but for me, that's the blockage in the thinking.
So the Australian Real Estate Industry Association has actually just launched an education training, like an RG146, so a bit technical term, for property investment advice for real estate agents.
Perfect.
And it's just a slither of the regulation, which means that they will be able to give general advice, i.e., I think this would be the rent that you get based on the valuation of the property. This is the yield. This is what you'd be out of pocket. So there is that piece that should appease the real estate agent. And just
give them a couple of years to get that run up, or how?
Again, you've got to give them a couple of years. I mean, this is not going to be solved overnight, and we don't want regulation to be too restrictive where it doesn't allow anyone to say anything about any market, right? So the definition, just for everyone's understanding, the definition that we're looking for is as simple as this. If a person comes to you to get advice on buying a property for an income producing return or a capital growth return, then that constitutes that they would need to get a statement of property advice or a statement of advice. Same way as if they're coming to you for shares, for personal insurances, anything that's already a licensed investment product. We're saying that, now that means that mum and dads can still buy direct. That's up to them, do their own education and DIY. And, obviously the podcast is all about helping those DIYs out there as well. But if you wanted to get professional advice, the concept is that would be the definition. And I've got a template that we've submitted as part of a Senate inquiry that I attended, and I've submitted that. I'll even put it up on our website because I think that's really important. I'll put that up. I'll put the Pippa link up there. Well, I won't. Ivis will, let's be honest. But the point I'm making is we can start to see what I mean by regulation, because isn't that a good news story that the government's sort of saying, because there are going to be people who lose money in property in the next 2 or 3 years. And then we're going, oh, you shouldn't have done it. We've been ripped off. And they'll be all on a current affair and 7:30 report. Oh, these people led me into thinking that property was the bee's knees and now I've lost my life savings. Well, if you had have listened to us and regulated the industry, and the government's, if you get on the front foot and announce that at your May budget, Treasurer, then I would be thrilled with that, Scott. You get out there and say, Scott, Mr. Morrison, yeah, please, the Honourable Treasurer, announce that you're looking into regulating property investment, and that would be a big thing.
Oh, massive.
That would be a big thing.
Hey, just a thing for the listeners too, and this is maybe hard to describe just via listening, but if you can think of a circle that's into 4 quadrants, on the left side of the quadrant, you can get some advice, and the left side of the quadrant is where the person is acting in the best interest of the seller.
Yes.
On the right side of the quadrant is where the person is acting in the best
interest of the buyer.
The left side is real estate agent top left corner,
Yep.
project marketer bottom left corner, and on the right side it's a buyer's agent top right corner. Bottom right corner is the property investment advisor.
Yep.
I want to focus on the bottom left corner because that is often the challenge, and that's probably the space that needs to be regulated the most in my humble view, because those guys are getting between 6 to 10% of the purchase price as a commission. And if you do the maths on a $500,000 property, that's up to $30,000 to $50,000 worth of commission for one transaction that these people are making. And the barrier for entry is a haircut and a suit, because if they're not regulated and they've got the ability to use words very, very well, they can hire a hotel
Convincing
room.
argument,
They can get people into a room and they can talk to them about a slide that says, look, this one's done 20%, you're going to get the same. And without any regulation or any principles that they need to base that on, they are then traveling around Europe because they've just worked for half a year to earn enormous commissions, and you're the one that's left holding the baby. So just a little bit of insight. We wrote about it in the book. We've got a video. We'll put the video up so people can look. But just so you know, that's how that quadrant of the market gets paid, and their agenda is for the seller. They get paid by the developer. So if they're masquerading as an advisor acting in your best interest, we've got videos on spruikers. We've talked about spruikers, but that is the quadrant that is the most in need of regulation, in my view, which will take some of this away.
Totally. So if you're listening, regulators, come and talk to us. Now, I do a bit of government bashing, don't I, Bryce? I do a little bit every now and then. I call a bit of bull dust on the governments every now and then, especially East West Link, Governor, State Premier Andrews. Andrews, yeah, it is. But I'm actually going to give him a tick today.
Fair dinkum.
Yep. Because one of the things that they've introduced, which I really like to help with housing affordability, is the idea of shared equity. And I think that this is a sensible way for the government to support a certain profile of a demographic in our community to help them get into the market. So I absolutely feel sorry for single income households in that sort of sub $100,000 range. It is incredibly difficult for them to buy a house or something closer to a city in not just in Australia but globally. Right? So the initiative whereby the government will buy the house in conjunction with that person makes perfect sense to me. Because let's face it, in reality, a single mum or a single dad or just a single person on a lower income who has to pay rent may not be able to save a deposit. So the idea that the government will come in and kick in or buy 20% of the asset and the single person can buy 80% of the asset and pay off the debt just sings to me. It's just terrific. That is good policy. Because obviously the government is potentially going to sell out of that asset over time as well, and that asset may have some, appreciation in it. So there's some good news story, but it gets that single person into the market. So congratulations on a good initiative, and I'd like to see that adopted in more states and territories.
Yeah, good point, Ben. So number 1, education. Number 2, supply. Number 3, introducing regulation. Number 4, an equity share scheme. Will that pass the Courier Mail Herald Sun test when the government's profiting from people? Even though it's only 2. I'm joking. I'm joking. I think it's a great thing. I think it's a great thing. But can you imagine? It'll hit the Herald Sun. The government's profited from their 20%, but it meant that people get in the first place.
Well, what about those properties that we looked at in Sydney there? Which were so. The New South Wales government is doing an asset realisation sale at the moment. So there's
It was at Millers Point.
Millers Point. Mm-hmm. Millers Point in Sydney, one of the most stunning suburbs. If I was to buy in Sydney, that would be the suburb that I'd want to live, right? Mm-hmm. Now they've got these series of apartment blocks, small, old period style, really, real great potential. We looked at them for our clients, in fact. Just to give you an idea, they're now selling those, and that's an asset realisation sale. So what happens with that money? It goes back into other services into the government. So if the government makes a small gain and is able to then replicate that, so in other words, let's say the money is quarantined into that scheme. So over time, if people are going to buy out that other share, the property's valued and they will get, and that money, that profit goes back into that scheme to help more people do it.
Yeah.
I think there's some merit in that rather than just putting it into general consolidated revenue.
Yeah, no, good point. The 5th one is for a bit of vision. And we talked about this before in terms of the fast train and how that could actually, instead of going out on the fringes and losing lifestyle, they can actually get better lifestyle and still have access to a capital city job market. Yep. So we talked about that. But for me, part of that vision is, and I don't understand politics anywhere near as well as you. So
I reckon I do. I mean, I don't think politicians
I've made the call. You're going for
politics.
Prime Minister, so you must understand it better than me. But just the you always think back in hindsight about why governments haven't made these big, bold decisions prior. But it's because they've got these short-term. The number one goal of a politician is power, to stay in power. Correct. So they make short-term decisions, and we need medium and long-term decisions.
We need nation building, Bryce. Nation building.
But how do you do big infrastructure projects when one premier goes and puts an east-west link in, which I would be affected by that where I live, so positively if it came through?
I don't think there'd be anyone negatively affected.
Well, there's a few people who put some posters up on their picket fence, but
that's the politics of it.
Correct, but the point is there probably needs to be something where if someone puts in a big infrastructure project and it gets ticked off by the state government and the federal government, that then no new government can come and undo that, which is the case here in Victoria. And I think then if people make big decisions, that fast link train has been mentioned many times and it doesn't get up, but I think if they can have that medium to long term and not have it in fear of their power, their number one goal of power, I think somehow that's got to be done to get some of these things up.
You can't make more land, and when the land's fully utilised and when there's high demand on that land, and this is coming back to the realisation for anyone who thinks that they're going to be able to, on a single income, buy a house in North Fitzroy or a house in Alexandria or a house in Bulimba or any of those type of things. Over time, it's just going to get harder and harder. So we've got to be realistic. Now, for those millennials who are upset about that, wake up call, crew. Come on, 25 years positive economic growth. You're living in some of the best standards of living in the world. Our wealth as a nation per capita is very handsome. We live well. And to take away that idea of aspiring to or to slow down our wealth building as part of the society that we're trying to build is actually detrimental to standard of living and quality of life. So I come back to this point, that land out wide is going to be cheaper to develop. It's going to, we talked about this off air. I would absolutely love to buy a house and move out of the burbs. Driving into work drives me mad. Yeah. So if I can get on a fast train, and the same, I'd go out in the city on Friday night, watch the footy. I'll take my lovely wife Jane out for dinner and the kids, and then 35-minute or 40-minute train ride home, and I'm in Shepparton or somewhere, whatever. And I've got my little acreage, or I'm living in a less dense, more calm environment. I'll buy into that.
Oh, absolutely. Singing from the same hymn sheet there.
So they're all of the main things that we think that the regulators and the decision makers can make. But I've got one bonus one for you.
You've got a bonus.
I've got
People
a bonus
one.
bonus. Yeah, I've got a bonus for you.
Yeah.
The bonus is, I've talked about this before, but around 3 to 4% in Australia do parents help their kids get into property. Okay, so that's where they basically give a guarantee. Okay, so they use the equity in their home, so it's no cash involved, and they give a guarantee. Now, in the UK and in the London market and around there, 25%. So this is another education piece to sort of say, it's okay to help your kids get into the market. So, and I think the parents will be like, if I turn this on its head and said, okay, parents, help your kids get in the market by reducing the value of all of Australian property, they're going to say, well, I don't like that. That's not going to help with my retirement plans. I mean, the fact that my house has gone up in value is part of my super dream, and I'm going to, downsize and take that cash out, put it in a super, and that's going to be part of my retirement. So I don't think most parents will want to see the value of property prices decline significantly in major cities. So instead, let it keep going, but help the kids get into the market by allowing them to, to basically give them the deposit that they need through the equity you've got in your house. So if you're interested in more of that, we're not biased towards any lender, but we've got a fact sheet up. Did we put a fact sheet up last time?
Is this a record for how many things we're putting on per show?
I know. It's all about education. It's all about. So if you become a member of the Property Couch, or you subscribe, you're going to get access to all this information.
Yeah, they go to the propertycouch.com.au. It's all there.
It's all there. Perfect.
It's all there. Iris, do you want to kill him? Is that what that looks like? Do you want to kill him? And if you want more details on that, Ben, rewind back to point 4, which is the equity share scheme of the government. The parents can do the equity share scheme with their kids.
Brilliant.
So beautiful. So there you go, folks. Thanks to that listener who wrote in last year who says we never summarise. So I've remembered that we've got to summarise. 1 was education. 2 was increased supply. 3 was introduced regulation. 4 was an equity share scheme. 5 was have a vision around fast train and big infrastructure quarantine for governments. And number 6, Ben, was the bonus.
Little bonus.
That was parents helping kids. Very, very good. So as Iris points to the time, hey, I forgot mindset minute. Mate,
let's go there.
The banter, mate. I just forgot about the mindset minute. A goal without a date is just a dream.
Yeah. Now that's a famous saying, isn't it?
It's a famous saying. A goal without a date is just a dream. What's the context for property investors? Having a backup napkin plan about what you're doing is not enough. You've got to actually have a goal that you're looking for, and you've got to reverse engineer, have it written down.
Yes.
Have you ever done those exercises when, in the last few decades where you go to a public positive mental attitude seminar of some sort and they go, write something down, you do a 10 list, you do it. And have you ever found it 10 years later and been amazed at how many that you've actually ticked off because you made the commitment to actually write it down and put some...
There has been some research around that too, that if you just have it in your mind and don't actually have a written plan, the percentages of people that actually achieve what they've done is significantly higher if they've got it in writing. And obviously if you've got a formal plan and if you've paid for a formal plan, even more so.
I found one about a couple of years ago, what I'd written down, because I'd moved and it actually had on a list to buy a Harley. And at the time, it was, because have a look at me.
I had one too.
I look like a Harley rider. When I bought it, I tried to get the ZZ Top beard, and after 2 years and 10 centimetre growth, no. But I did buy one when I was on the Gold Coast, at the time of writing it, I never actually thought that it would happen. And my wife and I had it for 6 months, and then I realised it's too hot on the Gold Coast, and I wanted to wear shorts and t-shirt rather than leathers. So I thought, this is a bad idea. I'm selling it, get a jet ski. But a goal without a date is just a dream.
Yes.
Do you remember that thing with a round circle with TUIT, a to-it? And I give you to that, and that's a round to it, because one day you'll get around to it. And then you go holidaying on an isle, someday isle, and someday I'll get around to that. They're 2 extensions that you'll get that in the car on the way home.
People will play that back.
You'll get that in the car on the way home.
I like it.
But this is your round to it, folks. And someday if you actually put a date on your goal, it will no longer be a dream.
Love it.
Life hack.
Hit me.
I have got no affiliate links to any of these life hacks. So just for the record to our listeners, because there are a lot of them around apps, but 1Password, Ben. 1Password.
Yeah, I've got one of these now after you.
Finally?
Yeah.
You do listen to me?
Yeah, so I've got one. And which one do you use?
1Password.
Yeah, I use LastPass.
Okay, they're both good?
Yep.
Both good. So for those listeners, 1Password, this will surprise you, but you've only got to remember 1Password because it's a vault where you store all of your passwords. And not only that, it's across all devices. So I've got it on my desktop. I've got it on my smartphone. My wife also has it on her smartphone. She's also got it on her desktop. So across the family, one set of passwords. So long is gone the need for the Excel spreadsheet with all of your passwords forever, because now they're mobile. The other good thing about it, Ben, is when I'm on I'm on a website, there's a little Chrome extension or there's a little browser extension.
They're fantastic.
That if I'm about to log into a page, instead of trying to remember what the password is or fumble around, you hit the little button, it then populates it for you, logs in straight away.
It brings the right password up for the right login.
And Ben, when you go and create a new password, 1Password automatically stores it for you.
Yes.
So that next time it comes up, how good is that? Time hack, life hack.
And if you're struggling to think of a password,
it'll recommend you one.
It'll recommend a really
I'm
difficult...
impressed by your homework.
I know. Well, you told me about it.
But I've been telling you for 4 years.
I think this is the first hack that I've... Is it a hack now? Is it?
Yes, life hack.
Life hack. So there you go. I've adopted some of your life hacks, mate.
Yeah, well,
it's great. See? There you go.
I'm impressed.
That and getting the bits of...
Well, I've got a life hack for you.
What do you got?
I've got one for you. Do you know when you're on a piece of paper and you've written a word and you want to cross it out so no one can see what you've written and you scribble it out and all that, but you turn it over and you can actually see it? So here's what you do. Say I've written the word...
Mr. Secret.
Say I put Ibis is no good, right, on a piece of paper, but I realised she's going to pick up that piece of paper.
Yeah.
What I then do is write Ben is great, Bryce is average, and I just continue to write more and more words over the top. And then when they turn over the back, they won't know what the original thing was that was written because there's so many words. So test it. Because how many times have we tried to scrub it out? We get a big, thick black texter. That one's for you, mate. That one's free.
Oh, gee. Not that we sit here and say bad things about people who write them
just
down.
Ibis. So,
not true.
Did you know?
That's a ripper. Okay, mine. Are we doing this? My turn?
Yeah.
What's this called?
Turn,
Did you know?
Did you know?
Right. So we're talking about affordable things. So I've done a little, 2 minutes of homework. Yep. So here's my little bit of homework. I found the, currently on realestate.com.au, the cheapest house you can buy in Victoria and New South Wales, because obviously there are two expensive states.
Yep.
So there is a place in, is it Crowlands in Victoria? I don't know where that is, so I have to have a quick look. It's near Ararat or Avoca.
Yeah. And
I can buy a 3-bedroom, 1 bathroom, 1 car spot property house for how much, Bryce? How much? How much will you take this off my hands for?
Last time I had this wild guess, I was grossly wrong, but why not have a go? 173.
You can buy 3 of these properties. $49,000.
Shut the gate.
Shut the gate. I mean, you could rent that out
for
49 grand. I don't know how good it is inside, but it's still free. it is actually standing, and it wasn't on a tilt.
Yeah.
So there you go, a house in Victoria, in Avoca, Ararat. So just basically in that
actually does shock me.
49 grand.
Wow.
Right? Here we go. Now I suspect it might be a country town of 10 houses, but that's not the point. So there's probably a little bit of lack of scarcity. Just quietly had a little bit of lack of demand.
Yep.
Hence the 49,000 price tag. Now for units, I've worked real hard.
Yeah.
Another 30 seconds.
Yeah.
I worked on this one.
The farmers don't live in units.
So a 1-bedroom, 1 bathroom unit in Maui.
Right.
Maui.
Isn't that a drink?
That's a drink. Maui.
Mm-hmm.
What do you reckon?
Oh mate, well I was grossly off then. It's a third of what I think.
So it's a flat.
One bedroom in Maui.
Yep.
If that was 49, this one has to be. Gosh, it can't be lower than 49, surely. I don't know. 50.
55.
Ooh.
55. You can get a little, and so Maui's obviously it's connected to sort of Melbourne in a way. So it's
on the fast train route.
Yeah, it's on the train line down that way. So a little 1-bedroom, 1 bathroom, 55 grand.
Nice.
On the outskirts of the big metropolitan area of Melbourne. New South Wales. Okay, you're going to love this one. Now this is an interesting one, right? Because it's a house, but it's a 1-bedroom, 1 bathroom house in Burke.
Ooh, is it the back?
The back of Burke. How much?
I was too busy thinking about what I was telling me. We're going to wrap it up. So the description again.
1 bedroom, 1 bathroom in Burke.
New South Wales.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll go 49,000.
$25,000 you can buy a house in Burke. Okay. Now
you're setting me up for failure.
Apartment in a beach suburb, New South Wales coastline of Merimbula.
Oh, yep.
Okay, we're now into about 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, 1 car spot. What's the damage? I was saying 60.
No, it'll be more than that. It'll be 79.
$44,900. Buy it now. $44,900. Do I have any more? Any more offerings? I'm once going twice. And
I don't like games with you. They're too hard. They're like the Trivial Pursuit questions.
So
that are too
did
hard.
you know? So there is very affordable properties, but I mean, we don't want to take the desensitise housing affordability. It's an important issue. But there you go.
But there's opportunity, Ben. There's opportunity everywhere.
Opportunity, cheapest prices of property in New South Wales.
There you go, folks. 5 ways to improve housing affordability. Number 1, education. Number 2, supply. Number 3, increasing regulation. Number 4, an equity share scheme. Number 5, vision. And a bonus is parents helping kids. There you go. Hopefully some people who are listening want to chat to you, Ben. The invitation is always to come on the couch or for you to interview them.
Too right.
So let us know. But until next week.
See you later.
See you, folks.